very much. You are here for how cloud solutions work together in an integrated fashion. The problem arose when we went from cloud to clouds. We've had a problem of corporate indigestion of many different kinds of clouds, public, private, hybrid private, virtual private, and so on. And this panel will look at some of the challenges and opportunities in dealing with the multitude of clouds and cloud services that are prevalent. I'm going to ask each of the presenters to briefly introduce themselves with their name and the company they work for, and what they do as a company or within the company. So we'll start with Gauri on the end. Please introduce yourself.
I'm first, okay.
It's very loud right there.
So, can we just close the door over here? Thanks. My name is Gurvinder Aluwali. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for a part of IBM's cloud computing business, which in that role has me covering the West region. In a sales enablement and architecture leadership, I represent all three brands of IBM, which is hardware, software, and services. I'm based in Dallas and glad to be on the panel. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Colleen?
I'm Colleen Smith. I'm Vice President SaaS and Cloud for Progress Software. It's a global role. I focus on working with ISVs around the world and helping them transition to SaaS and cloud. There's two core businesses of Progress. One has to do with application development, and the other has to do with data connectivity.
Okay, thank you. And we have 3 R's left. We have
3 R's, that's right. So my name's Ross Mason. I'm the CTO and founder of MuleSoft, and we've basically grown up integrating applications in the enterprise, and SaaS has become very important in enterprise now. The last 3 years we've also had a cloud business, and we've realized that actually enterprises really want a mixed architecture of both on-premise and cloud, and I pretty much spearhead the product strategy around how to deliver that, only from a technical perspective, but also from a business and alignment perspective as well.
Thank you. Ray?
Hi, I'm Ray Solnick. I'm the president of Appnomic Systems, Inc. Appnomic is a leader in the field we call IT preventive performance management, and we have a leading software that Gartner now calls IT operations analytics. So we're applying big data analytics to the IT operation to make sure that everyone's applications in the cloud and hybrid IT environments all work beautifully and work well together.
Thank you. And Rob?
Last R in the line here. My name's Rob Hull. I'm the founder and president at Adaptive Planning. Adaptive Planning is a leading SaaS or cloud vendor in the business performance management and business analytics space. We help companies from mid-size to large enterprise with budgeting, forecasting, reporting, analytics, consolidation, data visualization. So our view here today is as a SaaS vendor that is integrating with other both on-premise and cloud vendors.
Thank you. And my name is Mark Levitt. I'm Director of Business Cloud Strategies in the Global Wireless Practice at Strategy Analytics that serves the consumer and business wireless, mobility, and cloud industries. Before we begin talking about what we're doing about cloud integration, let's talk about what cloud integration means. It may mean different things to different people. So why don't we start on this end, and Rob, would you tell us what the term cloud integration means to you?
Yeah, I think this, so I've said a little bit of it in the introduction, and that is cloud integration for us as a vendor. We're really looking at integration, I'd say maybe on 2 levels. First is just data integration. How does our application and our system integrate with other data that's out there, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud? And then we've got integration more at an application level. How do we embed into other applications or integrate with other applications at an application level? Or how can we embed other people's apps into ours? So that's the context in which we come at it.
Right.
So the context or perspective that we bring to cloud integration or integration relates to enterprise IT organizations and enterprise end users being able to experience and deliver a consistent end user experience. So whether that relates to workflow occurring properly between applications, or whether it's where data resides and it's being secure. Ultimately, it's about an end user having a good experience. And then on the side of the folks who are responsible for delivering that experience, ultimately is the IT organization in many regards. We give them means and vehicles to manage that cost effectively and with quality. So that's our focus and a key piece of it from our view.
Yeah, from my perspective, we look at cloud integration as a couple of different areas. One is in the enterprise, where I think most of our customers are. They're really trying to understand how does integrating SaaS applications and publishing APIs to other application devices fit into the overall IT landscape. And it's broader than just connecting the apps. It's actually understanding how to model that infrastructure and their IT landscape. And then we also have a channel business, an ISV business, with Cloud Hub, which is our platform as a service for doing integration, that really focuses on helping SaaS vendors grow their value network. And by value network, I mean connecting to other relevant applications in their ecosystem that make them more sticky to their customers.
So it's a cloud-to-cloud integration.
Exactly.
Brilliant.
From our perspective, when we think about cloud integration, we're focused more on the data side of it. So it's the connectivity of data for queries, for applications, for all the different types of data that there exists, and that data doesn't just exist in the cloud. It might exist in one cloud, some might exist in another cloud, some might exist on premise, and so it's really the understanding of what's required for applications and for the ability to gain access to that customer data, to that financial data, or to any of the data that is really required that might not all sit in the same place. And that's the cloud has really helped to make sure that data is in more places, not less. And so it's important that you gain access to that data.
So I'll, being at the end of the table, I have the unique opportunity of summarizing everybody, but I'll also build on what I've heard from several people. So clearly, you pointed out the application and the logic, you pointed out the data. Clearly, those are aspects of the integration. There are at least two more that I would add to that, and that is management, which is something easily missed. So you need integration of the logic or the application, you need integration of the data, you need integration of the logic, of the management around all that. And there's a plus one that so 3 plus 1. So there's a plus one I would call out separately, and I'll tell you why, and that is capacity, integration of resources, right? And now, of course, granted that physical resources and capacity of compute are now manifested through a software layer, and they can naturally be folded into integration of logic or integration of data and management with it. But I just wanted to call that out separately because otherwise it could easily get missed. So once again, it's data or applications integration, application or logic integration, data integration, management integration, and capacity integration.
So we can spend hours and hours talking about what integration means and what the challenges are. Let's focus first on what the customers need and want. Which of your customers, what types of customers are the ones that come to you and say, we need help with integration? Can you describe some of those customers? Want to start with Ross?
Yeah, sure. So I always feel I have to play on both sides of the fence. I think for enterprises, it's really about how do I integrate probably the top sort of 10 or 15 SaaS applications out there. Obviously, Salesforce is one of them, but we see a lot of NetSuite, Concur, and a few other bits and pieces even in enterprises. Big challenges really is actually around not just integrating the data, but also identity management. So how do I actually ensure that I can offboard and onboard employees effectively, and how do I actually manage this effectively as well? One of the key challenges to the enterprise is they've been very used to integrating everything behind their firewall, and now the enterprise has been turned inside out. All the new endpoints, all the new applications actually exist beyond their firewall, and that presents a whole new set of challenges around how they actually manage the connections outside of their on-premise systems. I think I'd add to that on the SaaS side, where integration has changed is on the enterprise. When you bought an application, it was always up to the end user to actually drive the integration of that application into their systems. With SaaS, the expectation of the user has changed, and it's now up to the SaaS vendor to actually do the integration for the end user. So when I go to Salesforce, I expect that it will work well with Cloud9. I expect that it will work well with Marketo, and I expect it will work with other applications in the ecosystem. And that's one of the big challenges of SaaS vendors when they come to us, is they are now expected not only to build the app, but also to provide the integration between those apps. And that's actually where we help them.
So in our experience, the larger and the more mature the company, the more we're seeing an interest in transparency and manageability, Guri, to your point. And whether it's a SaaS or cloud company that has grown and is maybe 3-5 years old, or $10 million or larger, and in particular those who are serving enterprises, we're seeing a lot of interest. And then on the enterprise side, very large enterprises are really trying to figure this out, and in particular as it relates to managing the variety of vendors and being able to deliver a service level. One of my favorite terms in this realm is the idea of Franken-apps. If you think of Frankenstein, who was made of different human body parts, if you don't do it right, it can turn into quite a monster. And a lot of today's apps, just within the app, you have lots of different feeds of data, of information, of workflow across different components in your application. And then you put integrations between apps on top of that. And if your employees are not being productive because there's something not working in an app or an element of an app, that's your problem as the CIO. But the folks who are still kind of building their business, who are changing a lot, who are moving a lot, we're not finding as much focus or interest. They'll just work with many of the different cloud apps that they're using on sort of standalone basis and deal with the gaps in between.
Yeah, so I think one of the things we see, we deal a lot with financial information, and we've got customers that are perfectly happy to kind of move data manually without automating the integration. And they tend to be sort of, I guess, lower volumes of data, and the time frequency at which they need that information tends to be less. We get customers that need daily updated or even more sort of real-time information, very high volumes of data. Anyone that's concerned with whether it's just errors in the manual process or the risk of fraud in that process tend to come at very much, we need to integrate the data exchange and not just have it be manual in some fashion. And that can be, whether it's a mid-sized company or could very much be the large enterprises. I think the other thing that we're seeing is there's sort of an ability now to select a lot of best-of-breed applications, and some of them are on-premise, some of them are in the cloud. There's a lot of legacy data still in on-premise apps, and so people are interested in new best-of-breed cloud apps, but they want to be able to take advantage of that without losing the value of the data that might reside on-premise in applications that have not yet been moved on to the cloud or in some way changed. And so they'll come to us with, hey, how do I make use of that data with the cool new analytics that you're providing me in the cloud? And so that kind of on-prem to cloud integration is a key aspect as well.
I think, I would agree. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing that our customers ask us about is, how do I make sure that I don't lose all of that legacy data while we're trying to move forward and try to take advantage of new applications and new services that are available in the cloud? There's still a lot of either intellectual property or core data or information that my company has, and I want to make sure that that data is brought into the cloud. And so how do you bridge that gap, and how do you make sure that you don't lose all of that information? Well, at the same time, if you want to take advantage of these new capabilities in the cloud, the other thing is how do you bring in new sources of data and make sure that you're utilizing it the way you want to and integrating, whether it be weather data, or if you're trying to do something in a new mobile app, how do you bring in location or whatever it is, but still leverage that stuff that you have from the legacy that's really important to most enterprises.
So, Rob, to build on your point, and maybe Colleen too, and I'd be curious with the audience as well, what your experience is in this regard. One of the things we're seeing is a lot of these sort of batch moves of data, like beginning of day, end of month, end of week, processes to sort of update or reconcile data are starting to mushroom with many of our clients. And in some cases, they don't understand why, and they're not sure what to do about it. And on the one hand, one approach is, well, let's just try to make it happen more real time as it occurs. If there's risks with doing that. And the other thing that's happening is when these big batch jobs run, and as they mushroom and bleed into working parts of the day, it's starting to affect core operations. So when you ask Mark, who's interested in these types of issues, this is another very specific use case we're seeing, and I'd be curious if others are experiencing anything like this. We're also very focused on the financial services sector, so it may be unique to that. I'd be curious. Are you seeing that? Are you experiencing that?
So we see a little bit of the timing issue. I've got data, it's going to come in a batch, and I don't have 24 hours to process it. So how do you process that information? How do you move it from one system to another to make it effectively make it actionable data in a really fast time cycle? So in one case, we've got we work with mining company operations down in Australia, and they need end of shift data. So within a 1 hour period after the data, or after the shift has ended, they'll have an operational meeting to talk about it. And so a lot of information needs to be moved from the transactional system to an analytics system so that it can be understood and assessed, and it has to be done within an hour. And so that batch process still exists, but the time frame within which that batch process must be completed has to be very quick. And part of the solution there is around the integration. How do we work with that data well? And part of it is then on the other end, once it's in the app, how do we handle it quickly?
Surely isn't the answer there to go real time? I mean, making batch processes faster is a band-aid, right? You want to go real time. You actually mentioned there's a risk associated with that. I'd love to know what that risk is, because that's what we do every day for 35% of the global 500, and
Right.
The risk, I think, is often perceived without actually the reality being there. So I'd love to hear what you're hearing on the real-time side.
Well, I mean, with any change, there's risk. At least the clients that we have, the batch process is known, is understood, it can be validated, and they don't currently have a mechanism for moving the data in a real-time basis and dealing with it. So they need to put that in place, and just like any software implementation, sometimes there can be risk.
So it's project risk, not other risk. So project risk, yes. I mean, there's always a risk in any change. I'd say in this environment, there's a much bigger risk of not changing. So it would be my angle on that.
So I'll just cite two quick examples to the question that Mark asked, which is, what is it our customers are doing? One, without having to name the customer, is from the manufacturing sector. And their ERP system was a non-mainstream ERP, one of the older ERP systems. This is from the building sector, manufacturing sector. And so in wanting to move their application over to the cloud, so all the points about legacy application, legacy data absolutely echoed in my experiences, our experiences. And it had 16 touch points. So when you're talking about moving a particular application, it's really not just moving that application. What do you do with the touch points? Now, do you move some of the applications that have affinity to that, or do they stay behind and now you have an integration problem to handle? Not all of those integration touch points are necessarily, ready-made templates and connectors that are available. So you get into custom kind of integration work. Second example is Allianz, which is a French insurance provider, a $120 billion company. And in this case, it was more mainstream integration, and that was with Salesforce and SAP. So SAP was on their premises, and they wanted to integrate with Salesforce. There's an integration product from IBM called Cast Iron, which is from an acquisition, and that's what was used in serving that integration. So that's another example. And what it gave from a business justification, from a business outcome standpoint, is real-time renewal of contracts for insurance provider and real-time order processing for them.
To give the audience a chance to ask some questions before we proceed with the questions we had prepared, anyone would like to ask a question on the panel at this point? Okay, let's proceed with the questions we have then.
Burden's on you.
There we go. So what, if anything, do the customers or the industry misunderstand about cloud integration? Is there something different about cloud integration versus traditional data application management integration that you still feel that your customers don't get yet, or the industry doesn't get yet?
Well, I'd maybe echo kind of what was said. I think sometimes our customers, they're still stuck in the old way, so they immediately think batch or think API and kind of think of the ways they used to solve it, as opposed to thinking a little more forward around real time, or thinking about other ways in which to address cloud-based integration, if you want to call it that, you know. And I think that's one of the challenges is we've thought about new business models. We've moved from, you know, the way we used to buy software, the way we used to do things, and yet I think sometimes, I don't know if you've seen this, Ross, but sometimes people still think of integration in the old way, as opposed to, you know, thinking about more performant or more automated or more real-time ways to address some of these challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to argue with that. I think that's one of the challenges is, it's funny, integration is one area where we still have a lot to learn. If you think about a lot of areas of enterprise IT, it's you know, IT tools, system management platforms have all sort of been commoditized because people have figured out better ways of doing it. I think with integration, there's still 1,000 ways to skin that, and because of that, there's a lot of fragmentation and understanding on how to actually do it. I'd also say I don't think people really internalize what it means to do integration to cloud-based systems and all the new things that can actually go wrong. So it sounds easier because a lot of SaaS platforms have APIs, and the API is supposed to cure all ills, but in actual fact, all the API does is provide you an interface. Something has to happen between that API in the cloud and your back-end systems. And putting a platform in the middle there, I mean, I'm going to say this because I'm the person who puts that platform there, but it is the right way of doing it because you need some sort of central control and management of that integration. But a lot of people still go for building their own integration or using the sort of older mechanisms for doing batch integration based on the database rather than turning to more real-time. And real-time, for me, is where it has to go because there's many more transactions, and as such, you need to be capturing those transactions at real-time so you can respond to business events in real-time as well.
Because we talk about the cloud providing more agility for the business, and
Exactly.
yet we're still doing old practices and processes that don't provide that agility. You know, if you want to be, you know, and we in the SaaS world we talk about doing, you know, application updates daily, or this morning Netflix talked about hourly or minutely or whatever. I don't know. He was getting down pretty granular, but you know, in terms of weekly updates, if you have to think about that, and then but you've kind of batched your integration. You're creating more challenges or more problems than you're solving sometimes.
You said batch, not botch, right?
Yeah.
You know, so I'd be curious, Colleen and Ross, one of the experiences we've had, and that some of our clients have sort of underestimated, misunderstood, is the change management associated with having these integrations. And you know, you're talking about the different multiple touch points. We have a automation where there's 14 systems that are all sort of being orchestrated, and one of the sysadmins did an update or a patch to one server, and it took down the automation, and he did it sort of out of process, but this stuff happens. It's real life. It's a little bit tactical, but it's a real problem. Is one of these sort of risk issues, or just things that you need to be thoughtful whether you implement queuing in your integration or your enterprise service bus or what have you to accommodate that. How are your customers dealing with that sort of thing of when you do your change management, when you do patch updates, upgrades, and an interface changes and may not be compatible anymore? How are your clients dealing with that? How are you dealing with that?
Well, from our perspective, actually Cloud Hub, our cloud platform, we take on ownership of managing that infrastructure. So in essence, one of the reasons customers actually like it and they can get over the hurdle of doing integration in the cloud is because we take away those concerns. Obviously, we need to deal with it, but we do it on, wholesale for a lot of people rather than each person having to manage it themselves. On-premise, typically the enterprises we deal with are in the Fortune 2000, and they have pretty good change management processes. But one aspect that people underestimate with cloud integration is also like you said, orchestrating between 14 systems. There's 14 systems there where you actually don't own the code base or the release cycle of those systems you're connecting to. And it creates a whole new set of challenges around, if someone changes their API, they don't have a good versioning strategy, and you're connecting to it, that can potentially break your application. So in essence, there's a lot of maturity that needs to happen in the cloud, just in the SaaS vendors themselves to manage their own external endpoints. And we actually partner, I think we probably have about 40 SaaS vendors as partners on Cloud Hub. So that, and part of that partnership is that they'll tell us when they're doing new releases of their software, and they'll tell us when they're changing their interfaces, so that we can feed those changes back to our customers beforehand. So there's not a big break when something changes the API. If everyone's used Facebook API, or you probably haven't, but you may have read that they're pretty bad citizens in this regard. They change the API and they break all sorts of applications. Well, in SaaS you can't do that because it's no longer friending people and sharing photos. It's business transactions. And yet the market hasn't really matured to the state yet where those interfaces are bulletproof, but we're getting there.
I think the other thing I would just add to this is that there's a misperception that just the integration is the end game. And as you've said, it's the change management that really gets overlooked. And that's not just between the APIs and the application, but the data itself can often change, and the metadata structures can change. And a lot of times I think what's happening is we've got business users buying SaaS applications, hearing integration, hearing that things are connected, and expecting it to all just work without realizing that there's still some a little bit more technical information that needs to be part of the integration discussion that they're not always necessarily wholly prepared for. And so, well, what does your data structure on one end look like, and what is it going to? And so who knows that, and where will you get that information? Integration in and of itself is still a bit more challenging, I think, than a lot of people are expecting, especially at the data level.
I think you bring up a great point about the business buyer not realizing what it really means and what potentially needs to be done in order to accomplish what they really want when they hear that complete end-to-end solution, because it's not just, if it were just Salesforce or, that everybody had to integrate with, would be one thing, but, we have a lot of ISVs who are in these niche verticals, and there's a lot of other types of systems that their application needs to integrate with, and they aren't the standard ones that maybe everybody has out of the box. And so it's really understanding what will it take to give me that true end-to-end visibility that I'm looking for when I go out and acquire this new SaaS application.
But that I will say that is our role, right? What we're here to do is drive down the complexity to a point where you can connect to applications the same way as you connect with people with Facebook. I mean, It needs to be that easy. We have a long way to go to get there, but I will say that cloud and SaaS, and particularly APIs, are actually helping level the playing field. So at least we have some commonality in the way we connect to applications, and those interfaces are maturing. But there's many more evolutionary steps, I think, where integration will go. And obviously, I think we all probably sit here and think every day about how to make it easier and simpler, because the hardest bit of integration is just the realization that every problem is different and every problem is actually quite challenging.
We talked about SaaS, and SaaS represents more than half of the cloud services market. What about information as a service? What about platform as a service? Are the same cloud integration challenges present in those, and are we further along or further lagging the SaaS integration?
Yeah, for me it's a bit like comparing apples and oranges. It's like saying, how far are we with app server versus business applications? Well, PaaS for me is the app server, and I think there we're quite far along. It's really fairly commoditized. Infrastructure as a service, Amazon's done a great job of sucking the life out of the market for anyone else, and they continue to do it with PaaS as well. So I think those two on their own are less important. I think PaaS becomes very interesting, so platform as a service, when you start getting verticalized solutions. So
That actually is where we might be able to solve some of those problems and some of the challenges we haven't addressed yet. I think it's at that path.
Because a lot of the stitching you do with applications in verticalized solutions, you can build more of that into the platform and have hardened solutions that work for many more use cases. So, you know, we have an integration platform as a service that's dedicated purely to doing integration. So a lot of what that platform does is take care of connection management and monitoring of those endpoints that you connect to that are outside of your control, and give you some ability to react to changes in those environments. So things like the connectors to those endpoints matter a great deal. Blips in the network they shouldn't show up in your IT operations. They should just be solved in the platform itself. So I think where PaaS has a long way to go is really specialization and higher value services. And that's certainly what we're working towards in our roadmap.
Doesn't sound like we've solved all the challenges or issues with cloud integration. What are some of the technical or business or other obstacles to achieving cloud integration?
You're asking for the technical challenges, Mark? It depends on the use case, so let me sample through a few use cases. As far as certain well-known applications on both sides are concerned, integration between them is getting fairly, I wouldn't say automated, but at least templatized or being codified in terms of patterns, so you can accelerate the time to do the integration, time it takes to do the integration. If you get into less well-known, non-mainstream examples of applications like the one I cited earlier, then you've got to get into more custom kind of integrations. I think the challenge right now is not so much a challenge, but just the state of the industry on where it is in its infancy on certain kinds of integration, for example, bursting, right? So portability of images, where a lot of work has been done around in the standards bodies, being able to burst capacity from the enterprise to a cloud provider. You can characterize that as an integration play. It's a different kind of an integration. In fact, it's in one of the use cases that I've listed over here. I listed bursting, I listed workflow, I listed orchestration. So bursting is one. Another one is orchestration, which both open source communities like OpenStack, where IBM is significantly invested in, is working on orchestration capabilities, integration. So when I'm talking about orchestration, I'm talking about, think about as doing integration along the vertical axis. So if you do bursting, or you do integration between IaaS and IaaS, think of that as being along the horizontal axis. But even if you do integration along the horizontal, like for bursting to another provider, you still have to lay the software stack on top of it, right? So you still have to go up the vertical axis. So the point about orchestration is you have orchestration at kind of the bare metal, you have orchestration at the virtualized resources, you have orchestration at workload orchestration, and you have business services orchestration. So it's not entirely cleaned out to be able to do integration along the stack like this for orchestration kind of sophistication. Now, not all customers are necessarily demanding it, but in many of the customers in the set that we deal with, and this is where there's some products from the IBM side, products from the open source side, which are trying to solve the problems.
In the past, the industry has tended to let vendors integrate their own stacks, integrate their own ecosystems, and that provided some relief from the challenges of having multiple pieces working together. Are we confident that the cloud industry is based on enough standards and is open enough with open source and other software to prevent that from happening again?
Well, I'd say right now it's a bit of a wild west. I think there's lots of directions people can take, and I think we're still taking fairly small steps in terms of rarefying the landscape into something that's more standardized. I mean, we're talking about integration here. I actually don't think it ever gets properly standardized. I think what happens is the integration technology becomes more important or less important. So, give you an example. If everyone has access to the same SaaS applications, you no longer have any competitive advantage on the applications that you run, which, by the way, all enterprise systems will run that way for the last 20 years. You take an app, you customize it for your business, and that's where you've got competitive advantage. Well, today it's completely different. The more SaaS you adopt, the less competitive advantage you have on the applications themselves, and it's the more competitive advantage you have on the way you integrate those applications to model new businesses and business processes and new channels of business as well. So the ability to be much more agile and nimble in the way you integrate services, the way you publish new channels of direct business or indirect business through partner networks is going to become critically more important. And I think the idea of standardization will matter less if the integration is good.
I'd like to talk on behalf of the enterprise buyer. We're involved with SIIA, which is a great, wonderful organization. It's a great dialogue. We're also involved with an organization called the Open Data Center Alliance. And we spend a lot of time with Fortune 500 types of enterprises, and the CIOs and the executives there feel exactly the opposite way. And the organization has a number of initiatives. Guri, I'd like to hear what standard bodies you're talking about, because we're not seeing enough standard bodies and consistency. Our clients and partners and the ODCA are looking for transparency, interoperability, ways to avoid lock-in, and also facilitating great ways to have their vendors pursue competitive advantage, but not on some of those measures. So our experience, and in fact, we're working on a proof of concept to enable the enterprise members. So this standards body is coming at it from the enterprise buying community, and they're working on communicating what they'd like to see from the vendor community, folks like us and IBM and others here. And one of those is, and a challenge is, there's not even consistent standard units of measure. So if you're an enterprise and you're trying to figure out, well, how responsive is this application versus this one, or the infrastructure inside, there's no way to even really sort of measure that. And so quite the opposite, Russ. One last thing I'd love to hear your response to is, in my opinion, and that of an interesting author, Nicholas Carr, what's happening here is, just like the electric generation used to be run by enterprises and had to be a core competency to be a manufacturer and to leverage mechanical advantage through electricity, when distribution lines enabled the distribution of electricity and the centralized power generation, the world changed, and the standards enabled that. Same with the public and national highway system, right? You can't have roads with different widths, with cars of different widths, because they wouldn't fit when you hit another road or another state. And so as data centers turn into utilities, as companies like yours provide a vehicle for maybe being like an integration toll roadway, where, like you were saying, instead of the enterprise managing it, the enterprise can now be enabled, instead of focusing on keeping the lights on and how do I make sure these bits match those bits and I'm measuring it the same way, get that out to compute or pass or integration utility providers and get that consistency to enable that, maybe even enable some amount of consolidation so they can focus on where the true competitive advantage is, which is in leveraging a lot of these assets. I mean, CRM, not really a source of competitive advantage for a manufacturing company, a retailer. It's a tool that they use to run their business.
So before you said the last bit, I was going to jump.
Okay, so I'm a little bit on the edge there because you.
No, that's good. So the Fortune 500 care about those standards because they run data centers. For all the new enterprises, anyone who's started a business in the last 6 years, you don't run a data center. And actually you avoid it like the plague. And actually now there's enough SaaS offerings out there that you can run everything from ERP to manufacturing using SaaS systems. So I think where the standards body come into play, and this is what you ended up saying, which was much better for me in my mind, is that there needs to be standards, but the end user shouldn't have to care about them. It's the utility players that provide the data centers, and this is where Amazon is really just crushing everyone. And this is when Bezos says the internet is still very nascent, this is what he's talking about. The fact is, all those data centers that are run individually, it's like everyone running their own power generator, to use Nick Carr's analogy. And that will change. Once we get the national grid of data centers set up, then I think having those standards bodies will make a ton of difference for all sorts of reasons, not just monitoring, but also compliance. But it won't be the concern of every single enterprise. And that's the key thing. I think right now, while enterprises are very centered around standards, they're really trying to solve the same old problem, the same problem in the old way. And they'll have to do it because their data never leaves on premise. So, I mean, you were talking about this earlier. I mean, the fact is, I talk about the new enterprise being all these, SaaS and mobile endpoints, plus all the old crud, the new, the old, and the bizarre that lives inside the enterprise that still exists and will have to stay there forever. So, yes, standards do matter. They shouldn't matter to the end user. When business have the expectation that things should just connect, they really should just connect.
Right.
And often I find myself, behind closed doors complaining a bit, sort of saying, if you understood how difficult it was, but then you think about what does it take to make a phone call on your phone? Think about how many hops that phone call makes to route that system through different mechanisms, and it happens all in 2 seconds, and anyone can do it. Well, integration has to get that easy as well. The hops between applications needs to be as easy as making phone calls.
When that happens, does that put the integration platform out of business?
No, because the integration platform is the
Making it
network.
happen.
We then, for that point, it's the same as a utility network. It's a layer on top of that data center network that routes the data calls between applications. So I think it becomes very pervasive.
Your application should make that one call like you do. Everybody dials the number, and then what happens once it goes into the cloud, that should be automated. You shouldn't have to figure out, I need to go to this hop, to that hop, to that hop.
Yeah, I think back to your question, though, the challenges are that there still are some standards that are needed to help make that happen for the vendors behind the scenes. And then it's incumbent on us then to make it easy for the end users. And it's still not easy for the end users. Even with all that we're doing, there's still challenges. And so it's getting to the, how do I pick up the phone and just make a call? We're not there yet, but I think there's an enormous amount of opportunity to make it easier for the end user along the way.
Want to give the audience a chance to ask a question? Yes?
So you've all talked about data integration, but it seems that there's other possible forms of integration that are needed, and I wonder if you have some thoughts on what that might be. So if you're like an enterprise customer and you're buying all kinds of apps, I mean, it's not just data integration.
You talk about application and data.
Yeah, one of my favorites relates to what Guri was saying, which is also different layers. And so today, in a lot of ways, applications they're sort of like single gear bicycles. They don't have multiple gears where you can shift up and shift down, and we're paying for what we use, but we're not really making the most of the elasticity that's available in the net. And what Guri was talking about earlier was, as you scale up or scale down or meet different demand or load or requirement situations of your end users, these changes need to happen across layers, from physical layer to network layer to the application layer and what have you. So that's one of the more exciting areas at our company, where we're helping clients gear up an application, for example, for premium banking clients, deliver a premium experience, but then also gear it down for other types of customers.
We unfortunately need to wrap. Thank you for the panelists for being here today, and thank you for the audience being here. Thank you.
Thank you.